The morning of my 63rd birthday, I stood at the kitchen window watching the sprinklers arc across the lawn, thinking about how quiet the house had gotten since my wife passed. 4 years of quiet. You learn to fill it. Coffee too strong. News on too loud. Phone calls to old friends you keep meaning to visit. I'd gotten good at filling it. My son had called the week before to confirm he and his wife were coming. That alone felt like a gift. Evan lived 40 minutes away, but visited maybe 4 times a year, always with a reason for leaving early. His wife, Melissa, was pleasant enough in the way that people are pleasant when they're performing pleasantness. She remembered my birthday, always. A card, usually. Sometimes a gift card to Home Depot, because she'd decided that's the kind of man I was. My daughter-in-law's parents, Ted and Carol, lived 10 minutes from Evan's house. Ted was a retired pharmaceutical sales rep who'd done very well for himself, drove a new truck every 2 years, took cruises in the fall. Carol baked elaborate cakes for every occasion and posted them on Facebook. I'd met them at the wedding 7 years ago and at Evan and Melissa's housewarming, and maybe twice since. They were fine people. Loud but fine. I had a good group of friends. That matters, I think. People forget to say it, but it matters enormously when you're past 60 and living alone. My number when Dennis had organized a small cookout for me that afternoon. My old colleague Ray was coming, and a few others from the woodworking club I joined the year before. Nothing elaborate. Ribs, potato salad, cold beer. The kind of afternoon that costs nothing and leaves you feeling full. Evan and Melissa arrived around 2. I heard the car in the driveway and went to the door. Evan looked tired. He worked long hours in project management and wore that tiredness on his shoulders, slightly hunched even when he smiled. Melissa came in first, a large gift bag swinging from her wrist, and I noticed immediately that she seemed energized in a way I couldn't quite place. Not nervous, eager. "Happy birthday, Lawrence," she said, and kissed my cheek. Evan shook my hand and pulled me into one of those brief, shoulder-clap hugs that men do. 63, Dad. How's it feel? Same as 62, I said. Dennis had already set up the folding tables in the backyard. The grill was going. Ray was telling a story I'd heard twice before about a fishing trip in Montana, but he told it well, and people laughed in the right places. I watched Evan settle into a lawn chair and open a beer, and I thought, okay, this is good. He's here. Melissa circulated. She was good at that, working a small crowd, asking questions, laughing. I noticed she checked her phone twice in the first 20 minutes. Around 4, she announced it was time for gifts. I almost said it wasn't necessary. I'd gotten to the age where the day itself was enough, where I didn't need anything wrapped. But people had brought things. Ray handed me a bottle of scotch. Dennis gave me a gift card to my favorite hardware store. My friend George from the woodworking club gave me a set of Japanese chisels I'd mentioned once, months ago, that I thought I'd forgotten mentioning. I held those chisels and felt something warm move through my chest. Then Melissa handed me the large bag. It was wrapped in tissue paper, the expensive kind with no particular occasion printed on it. I pulled it aside and found a bottle of shampoo, a bar soap in decorative packaging, a small candle. I turned the shampoo over in my hand. $12, maybe 15. The candle might have been 10. The soap I didn't know, but the whole thing together was perhaps $35 worth of items from the kind of store where you shop when you're on your way somewhere else. We figured practical gifts, Melissa said, smiling. Things you actually use. There was a pause. The kind that other people feel before you do. It's a self-care set, she added, very popular right now. I looked at Evan. He was looking at his beer. I said, thank you. I set the bag down near the other gifts and turned the conversation back toward Ray's story, and the afternoon moved on. People didn't linger on it. Maybe they thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything, the tissue paper, the tag still on the candle that said clearance. The way Melissa's smile had the faint quality of someone who had made a decision and was satisfied with it. I went to bed that night with the house quiet again and lay there thinking, not about the gift. I'm not a man who needs gifts. I'm not a man who needs to be fussed over. I was thinking about 6 months earlier. Ted's 65th birthday had been an event. Melissa had organized it with the kind of energy she usually reserved for things that mattered to her. The venue was a steakhouse in Buckhead. Reserved private dining room, 40 guests. I hadn't been invited, which was fine. I wasn't Ted's friend, but I heard about it afterward through Evan, who mentioned it casually. The way you mention something you assume the other person already knows. Melissa got him a car, Evan said. I thought I'd misheard. She got Ted a car for his birthday. A Tesla, Model 3. I waited. We both did, Evan said. It was a joint gift. I remember setting down the coffee cup I was holding. I remember the particular quality of the silence in that moment. That's a significant gift, I said finally. Yeah, he's always wanted one. Evan shrugged with one shoulder. It felt right. A Tesla Model 3 runs somewhere around $40,000. I know because I looked it up that evening, sitting at my kitchen table in the quiet of a Tuesday night. I sat there for a long time. I was not jealous of Ted. I want to be clear about that because I've turned it over in my mind many times since, and that's not what it was. Ted could have a fleet of Teslas. That wasn't the wound. The wound was this. My son and his wife had decided, without stating it, what I was worth. They had made that calculation clearly enough, $40,000 in one direction, $35 in the other, and they seemed unbothered by it. Melissa seemed actively pleased. I thought about what I'd given them over the years. When Evan and Melissa bought their first house, I contributed $20,000 to the down payment. I didn't ask for it back. I didn't bring it up at holidays. They needed help, and I was their family, and I had the money, and that was the end of it, as far as I was concerned. When Melissa had her gallbladder out 3 years ago, I drove an hour each way to their house 4 times to cook meals and walk their dog while Evan was at work. I never mentioned it because it wasn't the kind of thing you mention. When they had plumbing problems last winter, a burst pipe that ruined part of the subfloor, I paid for the contractor because they'd already maxed their emergency fund on a car repair. $11,000. Evan had said thank you, genuinely, and I'd said of course, and that was that. I'm not keeping score. I never kept score, but someone else was. I lay there that birthday night and I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a rash one. I'm 63 years old and I've been in engineering long enough to know that the best solutions are quiet ones. You don't tear the structure down. You remove the load-bearing elements slowly and wait. I called my attorney the next week. Harold had been handling my affairs for 15 years. I explained what I wanted. A review of my estate planning documents, specifically any provisions that Evan and Melissa might rely on. My will had been written 4 years ago, after my wife's passing and the father grief, and I had not looked at it closely since. I want to understand my options, I told him. Harold is a methodical man, which is why I like him. He laid them out carefully. I didn't make any changes that day. I asked questions and listened and went home. The next few months, I paid attention differently. I noticed that Evan called when he needed something, advice on the contractor, a reference for a colleague, help understanding a benefits package, and called less when he didn't. I noticed that Melissa posted on social media about Ted and Carol's anniversary trip to Italy, a trip that Evan and Melissa had contributed to, and that I wasn't mentioned in any context in her life that I could see, except once, in a photo caption that said, "Family," where I stood at the edge of a frame taken at Christmas. I noticed that when I mentioned, casually, that my roof was showing some wear and I was getting quotes, Evan didn't offer to come look with me the way he would have when he was younger. I noticed that when I had a minor health scare in February, turned out to be nothing, an arrhythmia that resolved, Melissa sent a text that said, "Hope you feel better soon," with a small heart emoji. Ted had knee surgery in March. Melissa spent a week at their house. I'm not asking for a week of anyone's time. That's not what I needed. I needed to know I was real to my son, that I existed in his life as something more than a resource that occasionally needed managing. I started making different choices. The first one was the monthly transfer. Since my wife died, I had been quietly sending Evan $300 a month. It started as a gesture during a tight period for them, and it had simply continued, the way those things do when nobody acknowledges them, when they become part of the furniture of a relationship. I stopped the transfer in April. I didn't announce it. I simply stopped it. It took 11 days for Evan to call. "Hey, Dad, did something happen with the transfer? I decided to redirect some of my financial planning," I said. "I should have mentioned it. Sorry for the confusion." A pause. "Oh, okay. How are things?" I asked. We talked for 12 minutes about his work and the weather and a podcast he'd been listening to. He didn't bring up the money again. I think that told me something I needed to know. The second choice was the will. I went back to Harold and we rewrote it. My estate, which is not enormous but is comfortable, the result of 30 years of careful work and a paid-off house and some investments my wife and I had managed together, would go, in the new version, primarily to 3 places: a scholarship fund at my old university in my wife's name, a local organization that provided job training for veterans, and the small but meaningful sum to Dennis's daughter, who was putting herself through nursing school and who had, without knowing it, been kinder to me in the last 2 years than my own family. Evan received something in the new document. I'm not a cruel man and he is still my son. But the majority of what I'd built was no longer pointing in the direction of people who had decided I was worth $35. The third choice was the one that surprised even me. I had been talking, over the course of that winter and spring, with a woman named June. We'd met at the woodworking club. She came with a friend and stayed because she was more interested in the tools than the friend was. June was 61. A recently retired high school principal with 2 grown children who called her every Sunday and visited on actual holidays. She had laugh lines around her eyes and strong opinions about everything, and she did not perform her pleasantness. She was simply pleasant. By June, the month, not the woman, though also the woman, I had stopped spending Saturday nights alone. This was not revenge exactly. It was just living. But I will say that the quality of my days had shifted considerably. Evan and Melissa came for Thanksgiving. We had dinner, the 3 of us, at my house. I cooked a full spread the way my wife used to insist on. Turkey, 2 kinds of stuffing, green bean casserole made from scratch, a pie I'd been practicing since October. It was good. I was proud of it. Melissa mentioned over dessert that Ted and Carol were talking about buying a vacation property in the Smoky Mountains. It would be great for everyone, she said, meaning it would be great for her. I said that sounded nice. After dinner, when Melissa was in the other room, Evan sat across from me at the kitchen table while I washed up. He was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" I looked at him. He looked tired, the way he always did. But there was something underneath it that I hadn't seen in a while. Something that looked like awareness. "I'm well," I said. "Better than I've been in a while, honestly. You seem different." "I'm the same," I said. "You're just paying more attention." He was quiet again. "The transfer," he said finally. "And you seem, I don't know, less available." I dried my hands on the dish towel and turned to face him. "Evan," I said, "I love you. That's not going to change. But I spent a long time making sure you were taken care of. And I think somewhere along the way we both forgot to make sure I was taken care of too. I've just been correcting that." He looked at the table. "The birthday thing. The gift. I didn't say anything about the birthday." "I know." He looked up. "Melissa picks the gifts. I should have." He stopped. I should have paid more attention. I didn't feel the silence. I've learned at 63 that some silences are doing important work and you shouldn't interfere with them. "Ted's birthday present," he said. "I keep thinking about that." "I'm not asking you to choose between your family and his," I said. "I'm asking you to remember that I'm your family too." December came, and with it a phone call I hadn't expected. Harold called to tell me that a commercial property I owned, a small retail space I'd bought years ago and leased to a local printing business, had attracted interest from a developer who was buying up that block. The offer was not modest. It meant that my financial position, already comfortable, had become considerably more so. I sat with that information for a few days. Then I made a donation to the scholarship fund early, enough to fund 3 years of awards in my wife's name. I sent a check to Dennis's daughter with a note that said only, "Keep going, you're doing great." I booked a trip to Portland for June and me in the spring. She'd mentioned once that she'd always wanted to see the Japanese gardens there. I did not call Evan to tell him any of this. He called me in January. We talked for 45 minutes. He asked about the woodworking club. He asked about my health, specifically, not in the casual way, but with follow-up questions. He mentioned quietly that he and Melissa had talked and that he'd told her some things that needed to be said. He didn't elaborate and I didn't push. "I got you something," he said, "for Christmas. I know it's late. Can I come by this weekend?" "Sure," I said. "I'll make lunch." He arrived Saturday with a flat box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book, a first edition of a John McPhee collection I'd mentioned years ago, one I'd never gotten around to tracking down. He'd found it at a rare bookshop in Virginia and driven there on a Tuesday to pick it up. I held it and didn't say anything for a moment. "I should have been paying attention," he said. "I'm sorry, Dad." I set the book down carefully. "I know," I said. "Come on." Soup's on. We ate lunch at the kitchen table, the two of us, and talked the way we used to. About nothing in particular, about everything. He told me about a project at work he was proud of. I showed him what I'd been building in the shop, a blanket chest in cherry wood, the dovetail joints cut by hand. He ran his thumb along the seam and said, "That's really beautiful, Dad." It was a Tuesday in January, and the light came through the kitchen window at a low angle the way it does in winter, and somewhere in the neighborhood a dog was barking at something that probably wasn't there. I thought about my wife. I thought about June. I thought about Dennis's daughter, who I'd gotten a text from that morning that said she'd passed her clinical exam. I thought about the shampoo. And then I didn't think about it anymore. Some things, when they've done what they needed to do, you can set down. The trick is knowing when you've arrived at that moment, when the silence has finished its work, when the account is settled, not in money, not in score, but in the quiet recalibration of what you mean to each other. I poured us both more coffee. Outside, the sprinklers had kicked on in the cold, the way they do sometimes when the timer doesn't know the season has changed. I made a note to fix it in the spring. I've been thinking a lot lately about what people reveal when they think you're not paying attention. Not the big moments, the arguments, the confrontations, the things people say when they know they're being watched. Those are performances mostly. What tells you who someone really is comes out in the small decisions, the gift they choose when they don't think it matters, the phone call they make when they need something versus the one they make when they don't. The amount of care they put into something when there's no audience and no applause. Melissa didn't choose a $35 soap set because she was thoughtless. She chose it because she had thought about it, and that was her conclusion. That's the part that stayed with me long after the birthday candles were gone and the guests had driven home. It wasn't carelessness, it was a verdict. And here's what I've come to understand about verdicts like that. They are never really about the other person. They are about the character of the person delivering them. What Melissa showed me that afternoon wasn't who I was. It was who she was. What Evan showed me by saying nothing, by looking at his beer, that told me something about him too. Not that he was cruel, just that he stopped seeing clearly. That distinction matters. I didn't rewrite my will out of anger. I want to be honest about that. Because it would be easy to frame it that way, as revenge. As punishment, as a father making his children pay. That's not what happened. What happened is that I looked at my life clearly, maybe for the first time since my wife died, and I asked myself a simple question. Does the way I'm spending my time and my resources reflect what I actually value? And the answer was no. I had been operating on old assumptions, that proximity to family meant closeness, that writing checks was the same as being loved, that if I kept showing up, kept contributing, kept being available, eventually it would be noticed and returned. It wasn't cruelty that taught me otherwise. It was a soap set and a clearance-tagged candle. There's something in that, the idea that the most important information we receive in our lives rarely arrives in the form we expect. It doesn't come in a letter or a conversation or a carefully prepared speech. It comes in the small, unguarded moment when someone hands you a gift bag and smiles and believes the matter is settled. That's when you see everything. What I did with what I saw. That was on me. I could have been bitter. I could have confronted, accused, made scenes at Thanksgiving. Instead, I chose something harder and, I think, wiser. I simply redirected. I put my energy, my money, my Saturday evenings, my attention toward the people and things that had earned them. Dennis's daughter, who passed her clinical exam on a Tuesday and sent me a text that made me sit down. June, who showed up to the woodworking club for the tools and stayed because she wanted to. My wife's memory, honored now with a scholarship that will outlast all of us. Evan found his way back, not because I forced it, not because I punished him into clarity, but because people, when they are given space to see what they've been doing, sometimes choose to do better. That's not guaranteed, but it's possible, and I think it only became possible because I stopped making it easy to take me for granted. The sprinklers are on a timer. They don't know the season has changed. They just run the program they were given. People aren't sprinklers. We can learn what season it is. We can reset the program. The question is whether we're willing to. I fixed the timer in the spring.